Welcome to our study of the Minor Prophets. In this lesson, we will discuss the Book of Habakkuk. Habakkuk lives and writes in a time after the fall of the Assyrian Empire. This collapse turns out to be a good news, bad news scenario. The good news is that the most hateful and violent enemy of the Israelites has passed from the scene, and they will never return. The bad news is that this enemy has been replaced by the Babylonians, who have similar violent plans. Prophets like Isaiah and Nahum tell the people of God, you do not have to worry about Assyria. And they end up being right. But Babylon is another story. Each prophet spends a lot of their time bringing a message that is meant to guide the people of their current time, helping them make wise choices regardless of their circumstances. Still, Isaiah is extremely clear about the coming Babylonian captivity. In fact, the entire second half of Isaiah points to God's restoration of his people from this exile. Like Jeremiah, who is known as the weeping prophet, Habakkuk is filled with emotion. As a result, his prophecies carry a lot of weight. Habakkuk expresses frustration, confusion, and horror. These desperate emotions are shaped into faith and humility in the end, when Habakkuk is able to find joy in the Lord, even amidst great suffering. Habakkuk speaks plainly and informally to God, even irreverently at times, but nevertheless, he is a strong example of someone submitting to God's plan for Judah. In the book of Habakkuk, we see a God who is incredibly patient with those who have faith, and a God who looks at someone's heart. He is a God who knows whether our words come from a place of faith or faithlessness. One helpful example of this can be found in the Gospel of Luke, in the first half of chapter 1. Zacharias is punished for questioning the angel Gabriel. But when Mary, Jesus' mother, asks Gabriel questions in the second half of Luke 1, he listens and answers. God is patient with us if we are faithful, even when we are also weak. But God judges our faithlessness. As children of God, he brings us on a journey of faith. As Paul notes in 2 Corinthians 3:18, saying, "But we all, with unveiled face, beholding as in a mirror the glory of the Lord, are being transformed into the same image from glory to glory." You could say it this way: there is discipline in transformation, but there is also patience in the journey. In the beginning of this journey, Habakkuk fits the stereotypical frustrated prophet mold. He looks around, filled with discouragement at the sinfulness of the people of Judah. It's like they are begging for the judgment of God to come. Even though their wicked king Manasseh repents and the righteous King Josiah attempts to bring reform, Habakkuk's people seem to sin constantly. When they act violently and immorally, no one stops them, so they start completely ignoring the law. The wicked largely outnumber the righteous, and they use their power in majority for evil. As he faces the reality of just how bad things really are, Habakkuk cries out in chapter 1 verse 2, "How long, O Lord?" And then chapter 1 verse 4, "Justice comes out perverted." God's reply to Habakkuk takes him by surprise. God begins speaking to Habakkuk, saying in verse 5, "Look among the nations, observe, be astonished, wonder, because I am doing something in your days you would not believe if you were told." God knows that what he is going to say next will come as a surprise to Habakkuk. In fact, it will probably even seem like a twist of justice. So, what is this shocking turn of events? God is going to use people from the most violent nations to come and judge his own people. God goes on in verse 6 saying, "For behold, I am raising up the Chaldeans, that fierce and impetuous people, who march throughout the earth to seize dwelling places which are not theirs. They are dreaded and feared." The puzzle for Habakkuk is that even though the Israelites deserve judgment, they are still more righteous than the Babylonians, who according to Habakkuk chapter 1, verses 8 through 10, are keener than wolves in the evening, fly like an eagle swooping down to devour, collect captives like sand, mock kings, laugh at every fortress, and heap up rubble to capture it. This should sound familiar if you have read through the books of the prophets up to this point. God uses the Assyrians to wipe out the northern kingdom and to devastate the southern kingdom during the days of Habakkuk's great-grandfather. At that time, however, God leaves Jerusalem standing and the temple is untouched. He miraculously defends the city from the Assyrian king named Sennacherib when most of his soldiers mysteriously die outside of Jerusalem. What the prophet sees in this vision is something completely different. While Habakkuk doesn't write details about this, it seems he understands that Babylon will be allowed to destroy it all: villages, cities, Jerusalem, and even the temple itself. Afterwards, almost the entire population will be taken away to a pagan land. Even though God ends Habakkuk's vision by assuring that Babylon will be punished one day, as you can imagine, the prophet is shocked by what God is going to do to the Israelites. As Habakkuk processes the news, he provides us with an excellent example of how to approach God when we are both confused and horrified by his plans. He prays a prayer that is filled with questions and his own perspective on the situation. Yet, he still speaks with respect as he talks to God. Habakkuk opens by giving honor to God, saying in chapter 1, verse 12, "Are you not from everlasting, Lord, my God, my Holy One?" He goes on to recognize God's authority and faultless character by praising him, saying in chapter 1, verses 12 through 13, "You, O Lord, have appointed them to judge, and you, O Rock, have established them to correct. Your eyes are too pure to approve evil, and you cannot look on wickedness with favor." It is at this point that the prophet begins making his confusion clear. It's as if the puzzle pieces of what Habakkuk knows about God are not fitting with this new vision. How can God, who is not pleased by wickedness, plan to use the most wicked pagans on the earth to bring about his judgment? Habakkuk cries in chapter 1, verse 13, "Why do you look with favor on those who deal treacherously? Why are you silent when the wicked swallow up those more righteous than they?" Even in his deep confusion, Habakkuk shows that his prayer is coming from a place of faith. The prophet knows that any time God's words or plans conflict with his own flawed human opinions, it is God who is right and he who is wrong. The Apostle Paul puts it this way in Romans chapter 3, verse 4, "Let God be found true, though every man be found a liar." Even though Habakkuk knows God is right in all things, he still needs the Lord to help him come around to God's perspective. So he says to himself in Habakkuk chapter 2, verse 1, "I will keep watch to see what he will speak to me, and how I may reply when I am reproved." What a prayer! There's a lot going on here, but all of it shows that Habakkuk wants to be both honest and faithful. He is in awe of the God he serves, but he is also afraid of what is coming. He knows that God is right in everything, but he's also overwhelmed by it all. He realizes he needs God's help to embrace his plan in faith and peace. So Habakkuk actually asks for God's correction. Like the man whose son is possessed in Mark 9, who cries out, "I do believe, help my unbelief." Habakkuk is essentially crying out, "You are right in all things, God most holy, so please correct me until I see things your way." Now this is a prayer of genuine faith. After his prayer, Habakkuk writes in chapter 2, verse 2, "Then the Lord answered me and said, record the vision and inscribe it on tablets." Here's some good news. God answers our honest prayers. Are you confused by God's plan? Then you should pray a prayer like Habakkuk's, and God will answer. He will reveal himself to you, and he will help you understand his divine perspective, just like he does for Habakkuk throughout the rest of the book. As God begins to unfold and explain his plan for Habakkuk, we find the most famous lines in the book from chapter 2, verse 4, which says, "Behold, as for the proud one, his soul is not right within him, but the righteous will live by his faith." The violent and wicked Babylon is powerful, and they are spreading evil in the world now. But only those who are faithful in obedience will live in the end. This reminds us of Jesus' own declaration in Matthew chapter 5, verse 5, that it is the meek, not the arrogant, who will inherit the earth. God will, as Habakkuk chapter 2, verse 8 promises, bring justice to Babylon because of human bloodshed and violence done to the land, to the town and all its inhabitants. God sees the arrogant works of men, saying in chapter 2, verse 9, "Woe to him who gets evil gain for his house to put his nest on high, to be delivered from the hand of calamity. Nothing can be hidden from the Lord, who sees the sinful choices of all humanity. Habakkuk declares in 2:12-13, "Woe to him who builds a city with bloodshed and founds a town with violence. Is it not indeed from the Lord of hosts that people toil for fire and nations grow weary for nothing?" We like to make plans, and sometimes those plans cause God to laugh in response, teaching us that what we think is a great plan is actually disgraceful. Habakkuk chapter 2 verse 14 promises, "The earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord, as the waters cover the sea." Notice it doesn't say that the earth will be filled with the knowledge of what we think is best. Out of that realization, we are given some good advice in Habakkuk chapter 2 verse 20. "The Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth be silent before him." In the third and final chapter of Habakkuk, the prophet is again transparent as he responds to the vision of God's judgment against human evil. He is overwhelmed because he knows a taste of it is coming through Babylon sooner rather than later. We can almost feel the awe in Habakkuk's voice as he responds to the second vision. The Old Testament character Job is also given a difficult revelation from God and responds by crying out in Job chapter 42 verse 5-6. "I have heard of you by the hearing of the ear, but now my eye sees you. Therefore I retract and I repent in dust and ashes." Similarly, Habakkuk responds in reverence and humility, crying out, "Lord, I have heard the report about you and I fear." From here, the prophet writes a majestic song celebrating the past works of God, who came in glory to judge evil and to deliver his people. He hopes that God can do these things again, saying, "O Lord, revive your work in the midst of the years. In the midst of the years, make it known. In wrath, remember mercy." As Habakkuk finishes his song, he is overcome with grief about what will happen to the Israelites and cries out in chapter 3, verse 16, "I heard and my inward parts trembled. At the sound my lips quivered. Decay enters my bones, and in my place I tremble, because I must wait quietly for the day of distress, for the people to arise who will invade us." Habakkuk knows destruction is coming, but he is not broken. His faith in God is steadfast and secure. As he concludes the book, Habakkuk's faith overflows into a final song of praise, one that is both well-known and powerful. As we close this lesson, make this your prayer too. "Though the fig tree should not blossom, and there be no fruit on the vines, though the yield of the olive should fail, and the fields produce no food, though the flock should be cut off from the fold, and there be no cattle in the stalls, yet I will exult in the Lord. I will rejoice in the God of my salvation. The Lord God is my strength, and he has made my feet like hinds' feet, and makes me walk on my high places."